Hello and welcome. It is Tuesday, March 23rd. It is the afternoon by some of us, the evening by others. We're so excited to be hosting this event. My name is Danny. I'm the events coordinator here at One Day Sooner, and we have a great panel lined up for you of volunteers who have signed up for challenge trials. I am introducing Julia Mirza, who is our Director of Operations and Organizing, who will be talking a little bit more about challenge trials, what they are, how they're used, and introducing our panelists. Before we do that, I just want to point out that we will be having a Q&A session where the audience can submit questions. That function is down, it should be down at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions, please submit it through that function, and we will pick those from those and ask some of our panelists. So with that, Julia, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, thanks so much. So as Danny said, I'm Julia. Like our panelists, I am interested in being in a challenge trial for COVID-19, which is how I came to first volunteer and then this summer start working for One Day Sooner. And so I'm here in that role as Director of Organizing to moderate this discussion with some other volunteers from our organization. So to start off, what is One Day Sooner? We got started just over a year ago, or just under a year ago, in April 2020. And we advocate on behalf of volunteers for high impact medical studies, including and in particular COVID-19 challenge trials. And I'll get to what those are in just a second. We were born during the COVID-19 pandemic, as you can tell from that April 2020 date, in order to represent volunteers who want to be in these challenge trials, people who wanted to rapidly accelerate the deployment of the most effective COVID-19 vaccines possible. So what do we do at One Day Sooner? We have four main departments, so four main things that we work on. We research how to best contribute to science and public health. We organize a core of past, present, and future volunteers for high impact studies. We communicate our volunteers' voices to the public, we amplify their messages, and we advocate for better policy to decision makers in the US and around the world. We are an international organization. You can tell that I am an American, I'm in Boston, but we are a global nonprofit. And our aspiration is for research participants to be treated as equal partners with the scientists who study them in order to advance the frontier of scientific knowledge and improve global health. We've come quite a long way in the last year. So in the past 12 months, tens of thousands of people have signed up with us to express an interest in being in a COVID-19 challenge trial. So it's been really excited to see all the interest in our organization. So what is a challenge trial? To summarize briefly for the purpose of getting started, in human challenge trials, healthy participants are exposed to a pathogen, such as a virus, under controlled conditions so that scientists can learn more about the disease caused by that pathogen and can more quickly see whether potential vaccines or treatments are effective. Challenge trials have a long history. They've been used in the past to develop vaccines for malaria, typhoid, and cholera, as well as treatments for flu, among other uses. And they could provide helpful for ending the COVID-19 pandemic in many ways. But I'll focus on three briefly, and we can talk about more about these uses in our discussion. So first, COVID challenge trials could speed up identification of effective vaccines. Deliberate exposure to the coronavirus would yield results significantly faster than the natural exposure relied upon by traditional phase 3 vaccine trials, which is how the vaccines currently on the market for COVID-19 were tested for efficacy. Second, challenge trials that re-expose people who have already had COVID, so reinfection studies, can teach us about how long lasting and how strong these people's immunity is to the virus in terms of future infections, repeated infections, helping to inform public policy and personal decisions. And third, challenge trials allow researchers to gain unique insights about the coronavirus that can inform developments of future vaccines and treatments. A lot to digest there. So, where are we now when it comes to conducting COVID-19 challenge trials? Because while this may be new to some of you, it's something that we have been working on and advocating for a year now. And so I'm excited to be able to say that UK regulators in February announced that they had approved the world's first COVID-19 human challenge trial, which began in London in early March. This trial is still underway, it's not yet complete, so we're not going to get into the specifics of this trial during this discussion. However, I will note that the trial is being delivered by a consortium of influential players. It's the UK government's vaccine task force, it's Imperial College London, it's the Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust, and the pharmaceutical services company hVivo, which has a long history of conducting challenge trials. In this trial, up to 90 healthy British volunteers ages 18 to 30 will participate, and these volunteers will be screened for possible health risks before being allowed to take part. This trial was approved by a special research ethics committee convened by the HRA to rigorously evaluate the risks and benefits. This study is called a characterization study. It intends to establish the smallest amount of virus needed to cause an infection in most people. And this will give doctors greater understanding of COVID-19 and the coronavirus and help support the pandemic response. Once this initial study has taken place, further vaccine and treatment challenge studies will be possible once we know the smallest necessary amount of the virus for infection. And these potential future trials would involve taking vaccine candidates that have already been proven safe in clinical trials and giving first the vaccine and then exposing small numbers of volunteers to the coronavirus, which will help identify the most effective vaccines and accelerate their development. So with that background, I'd like to introduce the 4 volunteers on today's panel. Very happy to have them with here today to chat. First, Zain Imam, give us a wave. He's originally from South Africa and currently lives in Madrid, Spain, where he works in strategy and innovation at the IE Business School, and he teaches a few strategy courses. He previously obtained a Bachelor's of Commerce from the University of Cape Town, as well as an MBA from the IE Business School and a Master's in Market Research and Consumer Research from the IE School of Human Sciences and Technology. Good to have you with us, Zain. All right, next we have Gabrielle Kleinwax, who is originally from Maryland near DC and currently lives in Boulder, Colorado. She is a PhD student in mechanical engineering at the University of Colorado Boulder. She previously obtained a Bachelor's of Science in Physics from Haverford College. And in addition to her activities with One Day Sooner, she volunteers on a farm at the Jewish Community Center of Boulder. Next, we have Danica Marcos, who was born in the Philippines, but she moved to London with her family when she was very young. She graduated from Lancaster University in 2019 with a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. She's now the music director for the Catholic parishes of Borehamwood near London, and she's also the deputy chapter manager for the UK chapter of One Day Sooner. And fourth, we have Alex Patterson, who is from Belfast, Northern Ireland. He has a degree in psychology from Queen's University Belfast and a master's from the University of Sheffield, where he is currently a PhD student. So that is our panel for today. And to get us started, I have a series of about 10 questions here. And once we've worked through them, we'll start looking in the Q&A for additional questions. But just to set the scene a little, I want to acknowledge that while everyone has different coronaversaries, I hear from our British panelists that 1 year ago today, the United Kingdom went into lockdown. And a lot of places around the world started hitting that point of crisis in mid-March as well. We certainly did in Boston. And so I'm curious where each of our panelists was when things started heating up for them around this time last year, And could you tell us a bit about what your life looked like for the next few months and how COVID has affected your family?
I could kick us off if you want, Julia.
Yep,
So
go
hi,
for it.
everybody, and thanks for the introductions. So to answer that first question, it was actually a bit crazy. I took a flight from Madrid here in Spain, where I live, to go to a friend's wedding in South Africa, and actually ended up arriving and being told that everybody in Spain who came from Spain had to self-isolate for 2 weeks. And after that, I was told that I had to self-isolate in an Airbnb for 2 weeks, and ended up being stuck in that Airbnb for 3 months,
Oh gosh.
which was completely insane. And because they locked down domestic travel, I ended up getting stuck in Cape Town in South Africa, and my family were actually in Johannesburg, so I couldn't even see my family. So I ended up being stuck in an Airbnb for 3 months before being repatriated by the Spanish government to get repatriated from my home country to get back to Spain. It was completely insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get to see your family on the way out, or was it just straight
Not
back?
even.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
literally straight back, because with all the regulations and all the measures in place, it was really like, to even just get from South Africa back to Spain, there wasn't a way to go via Johannesburg
Mhm.
with my family. Everybody was still under lockdown. So it was a crazy adventure at the beginning of this. And needless to say, I didn't get to even go for the wedding.
Yeah.
Didn't even get to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an
Expensive
expensive Airbnb.
for sure. Who else?
I can
Yep, go for it.
say briefly just that that was mid-March was around the time our labs closed. As mentioned, I'm a graduate research assistant at University of Colorado, and they just closed our lab. We got an email like 2 days in advance, like March whatever. I think it was the 15th actually. March 15th is your last day. And I remember we stayed up, a small group of us stayed up trying to finish things in the lab until like 3 a.m. to get stuff that we could take home with us. And after that, I was just kind of drifting a little bit, I would say. I stayed in Boulder. Some people went back to wherever their families were living. And that was the main thing. I just like spent months like, kind of adrift. Not really able to do research, and I don't have any stranded travel stories or anything. It was just it was just like really that feeling of like, what do I do now?
Right. Danica?
So at the beginning of the pandemic, I had recently graduated from university, and I was trying to apply for jobs. And then I ended up stuck at home, not able to leave the house. And because my mum is diabetic, we were particularly worried about her level of exposure. So for the next few months, I actually stayed within the four walls of my house, and I didn't go out for exercise out of pure fear of bringing the virus back in. My sisters did the grocery shopping instead as well, so I didn't even get that little exercise out, and they'd leave it at their doors. So yeah, that's how I began the first few months of the pandemic. It's just not leaving the house at all, hoping that everything will get back to normal quite soon, which obviously from a year on isn't the case. But
Yeah. I remember my old job, they sent us home and they were like, oh, it's just temporary, don't need to take everything from your desk, and not the way it turned out.
Yeah.
Alex?
Yeah, mine's probably the most boring in that I was already in Sheffield by the time lockdown started. And thankfully, I'm doing work where I don't really have to be any specific place. A lot of it I can do from, a computer or a laptop. And so it was simply at the beginning of lockdown, just a lot of working from home. It was definitely very lonely during the the start, because a lot of my friends sort of went away back to be with their families, and so it was, as I said, lonely, and I couldn't obviously travel back to see my family. But I think compared to a lot of what other people, both in this webinar and also other people, have sort of suffered outside of it, I'm comparatively very lucky.
Yeah, still a lot of feelings of sort of being apart, though. Yeah. And I know each of you found out about One Day Sooner at slightly different times, but I'm curious how much you remember about when you first came across One Day Sooner, what your initial reaction was, and how much you thought through the process, how much you thought about it before registering with us. Zane? Oh, Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I probably found out about One Day Sooner on Twitter, and to be perfectly honest, I also probably did not put that much thought into it before putting down my details, but I would justify that in the sense that it's better to put them down and then later change your mind, as opposed to forget about it later down the road. And obviously I've become more invested and thoughtful about it now, but I think even at the time, I guess compared perhaps to other people, I just thought that it made sense that challenge trials, like you've sort of discussed before, occur.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think on my side, I think we've discussed this before, Julia, that I'm a huge fan of the YouTube channel Vox.
Yep.
And they made the Vox video about human challenge trials. And I mean, while stranded in that Airbnb for 3 months, you do a lot of YouTubing, and one of them was I came across this video, and I'd been thinking of like ways to get involved that are really like actually high impact, that can actually help. And I think when that video just explained it so well, the impact that can be had in shortening the time of phase 3 trials. And it got me at that point, and I really wanted to be involved from that point on.
Yeah, I would try to link to the Vox video in the chat, but I'm not very good at multitasking, so I will leave that for a later point. But it is an excellent video. It was really great to have them working with us on that project, and certainly got us a lot of attention. Danica?
Yeah. For me, it was because I was sitting at home isolated for months, and I realized personally I'm not actually scared about what the virus would do to me. I'm just scared about what it would do to my family. So I thought there is no way that I had it at that point because I hadn't left my house. So I kind of tried to look at trials. I thought I'm in a unique position. If I were to get the virus, I'd probably be okay. So that would potentially be useful. So I started looking up human challenge trials, and there actually wasn't anything. There were the standard vaccine trials with the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 cases, but not human challenge trials. And I think Google algorithms remembered my search, because then a few months later, One Day Sooner popped up in, I think it was on my newsfeed on Facebook, and it's been confirmed to me that One Day Sooner never bought advertising space on Facebook. So
correct. We have not paid for Facebook or Instagram. We post on both websites. But
yeah, I mean, it was very early on it was maybe May, June. So
yeah.
Very that way, but.
I'm sorry, but just get back to it. You specifically sought out challenge trials. And what sort of made you think challenge trials in particular?
Because there was no way that I had already had the virus, and I knew that, and I knew that I would be okay, and I'm willing to get it. And obviously, human challenge trials are one of the quickest ways to develop a vaccine. You learn more about the virus through it and learn more about the effects of the vaccine, because as much as stage 2 and stage 3 parts of vaccine development will be able to tell you if once they get it, their exposure, once you receive the vaccine, if in 6 months' time they don't get it, you can assume that it works to a certain extent. But with human challenge trials, you can know for sure, because there's no guarantee that these people, whilst they are isolating themselves and only going out during grocery shoppings or to the doctors or something like that, there's no guarantee that they have actually been exposed with enough of the coronavirus to infect them. So I knew that human challenge trials would be a quicker way to do it.
Yes. I didn't mean to put you on the spot at this point in the discussion about that. It's mostly because I think a lot of people in our audience are like, what are challenge trials? Why would someone even know what challenge trials are before One Day Sooner, pops up in their life? So.
Yeah, I think it didn't occur to me that human challenge trials were actually very difficult to set up, in all honesty. Yes, of course, now being a One Day Sooner for a lot longer, I know a lot more about the struggles with the ethics panels and the different intricacies of that.
But to you, it seemed a pretty basic thing to go looking for. Yeah. Cool, thanks. And Gabrielle?
Yeah, I did not know what challenge trials were before this pandemic. There's this public intellectual that I follow on social media, Robert Wiblin, and I had just seen a post from him on Facebook that described challenge trials, that referenced One Day Sooner explicitly and had the sign-up sheet. One Day Sooner was actually still really small at that point. I think the entire website was exclusively that sign-up sheet. And I slept on it. And the next day I woke up and went back to that website and signed up. It's pretty cut and dry.
Cool. I was just going back to confirm whether you did indeed sign up just when it was the COVID challenge. And that's correct. Yes, we started out as thecovidchallenge.org, one little web form. And then in mid-April, we sort of burst out a sort of full-fledged website, which has continued to expand since then. So
I remember that when I wanted to go back to that website, it was really hard for me to find again because it had that weird long name. So I had to go back to the specific Facebook post instead.
Thecovidchallenge.org now redirects to One Day Sooner, but I don't think anyone ever goes looking for it anymore. Cool. So Gabrielle mentioned you slept on it. Danica mentioned, you're already interested in it. I'm curious, when you all were first thinking about challenge trials for COVID-19, how you thought about the risks that were involved. And, I'm also interested in how that's developed over time. But, when you were first signing up, we didn't know much about the virus other than that it was dangerous. There were people dying, there were people having serious cases, there were people who were starting to learn a bit about long COVID, but that's been a really long journey. So I'm curious, a lot of people were trying very hard not to get COVID, and here were people who were willing to step forward and actually be exposed. So I'm curious how you could, if you could each talk a little bit about how you think about the risks involved. Zane, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I could start us off. I think from my perspective, there's a part of me, I think, that got that same news feed that everybody else was getting, that it was primarily something that was dangerous to people who were older and had some type of comorbidity. And I think that equipped with that, it felt like if there was an inevitable point where I was going to get this, why not make it useful? And I think that kind of stuck with me, right? I think it's good to avoid it, and it is absolutely true. I think it was a very like basic idea at first, and I think because I've been involved in with One Day Sooner, it's been a bit more advanced, thinking about like, you know, the lack of knowledge of long-term effects, etc., and acknowledging that a bit more upfront. But even with all those things in place, I do still fundamentally think that speeding up this process as a young person who just has less likelihood of something bad happening in the process, and actually significantly more that you can contribute by doing this purposefully. It felt very it felt like the right risk to take. We take risks crossing the street every day. We take measured risks all the time. This felt like a good risk to take.
Thank you. Gabrielle?
I really resonate with what Zane said about it being something that I did feel that there was a very good chance I'd get it anyway, with even being as careful as I was being. Especially when I first signed up, we didn't know that much about how transmissible it was. So I was very much of the mindset that if I get it, I would prefer to get it in a way that could be useful to others. I also felt, you know, I think as many of the volunteers did, that I was very low risk comparatively. I'm in good health, I'm young, all of the factors that are important. So I thought I would be in a good position to help others that way. And I was much more concerned about the risks to my family, especially to my grandmothers. And furthermore, there was definitely the knowledge that hospitals were pretty, they were really, really like at capacity or over capacity in a lot of cases here. I wasn't very aware of the situation in other places, but, you know, to me, there seemed to be no greater risk in participating in a challenge trial, because at least then you'd be guaranteed medical attention. This is, of course, not the main reason I signed up at all. But just addressing the risks, I felt that there was no greater risk in participating in a challenge trial than in not participating. So, and that was, you know, that reasoning was from all of the factors that I described.
Yep. Danica?
In terms of actually dying from the virus, at this point when I did sign up, barely anyone who was in their 20s died from it, unless they had underlying conditions. So, I mean, we also didn't know about long COVID, so that's another different aspect and a different...
Yeah, we can get to that.
Yeah, we'll get there, spoilers. But, so I knew that the likeliness of me dying from the virus isn't high, and yes, like just as Gabrielle said, if I'm going to catch it anyways, it might as well be for a purpose. If I'm going to be ill, if I'm going to suffer, then I want that to be worth something. I want that information to be used to help others, because I looked around and I saw, I used to volunteer for the food bank across the street from me, and the amount of people needing help, emergency support from food banks because they've had to be fired from their jobs because of the pandemic. It was crazy. The amount of people who couldn't feed their children. It was horrible. And one of my best friends also lost both of her grandparents early on in the pandemic. And watching her family struggle and suffer through that and not be able to properly grieve and celebrate her grandparents' life because they have family members abroad and they couldn't come over and have have a big funeral and properly mourn. It made it made it important for me to try to help end the pandemic as soon as possible. And, you know, every day that the pandemic goes on, more and more people die. So I thought the risk for me is low. Not going to die, might be ill, to be honest. There is, you know, I might end up in a serious condition, but I will overall recover it. There are a lot of people who won't if they catch it. So if deliberately getting infected will stop and save one life, then that's worth me being ill for a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Alex?
I think everyone else covered the sort of general points, you know, being in a low risk group, wanting to, you know, help contribute to ending the pandemic in any way, big or small. One of the things early on that sort of made it click for me was thinking about normal trials where they give people, you know, either the vaccine or placebo, and then just sort of follow them over long term as they live out their lives. And I just sort of realized, like, that still requires that people come into contact with the virus and that some people, you know, get the virus. So it's just, and obviously I still think that, you know, those types of trials are useful. And I'm not saying that, you know, a challenge trial is necessarily, you know, better, or that we should get rid of the old type of trials, but simply that it's, you know, it's sort of, when I was looking at it from that perspective, it seemed like, you know, I could either take part in like a normal trial and sort of go about the long way of getting COVID, or I could sort of, you know, just sort of bite the bullet and just sort of go through like the challenge trial route and just sort of get COVID that way.
Yeah, I remember what it was like when AstraZeneca in particular was going through the process of getting their phase 3 data, and they had to start up new trials in South Africa and Brazil and the United States because cases were coming under control in the United Kingdom. And so, you know, their ability to conduct a fairly efficient phase 3 trial was in doubt due to you know, fewer people contracting COVID. So a good reminder there that phase 3 trials also rely on infections. So some, you know, a lot of you talked about how, you know, as young and healthy people, we saw at the beginning and are continuing to see that people in that cohort are at a much lower risk of death or serious disease from COVID. But we are also seeing that even people who had mild or asymptomatic cases may end up having long-term symptoms from COVID. There were people who were young and healthy when they first came down with COVID, and who are still now struggling with effects ranging from chronic fatigue to autoimmune issues to lung and heart damage. And these are things that will potentially affect the rest of their lives. And so I'm curious how some of you would sort of respond to people who, particularly the arguments we're seeing these days from ethicists who point at long COVID and say, this is, you know, a reason why we can't hold COVID-19 challenge trials. It's too dangerous even for young people to be putting them in a trial like this for COVID. We don't know who's at risk for this. It's just too much of a chance to take.
So I could kick us off if so. I think that, look, it would be, this is a fact, right? We don't know as much about the long-term effects of COVID, and this is part of the ethical dilemma, right? For both a volunteer and for somebody setting up a challenge trial. The way that I think about it is a little bit different as well. And look, this is a unique perspective. I'll be the first to say so. But I do think that there's something very, there's an organizational benefit that we have here, having a bunch of volunteers together organizing to make this possible. We make it feasible to lower the risk for everyone if we kind of lobby as a group of volunteers. So if you're going to have these long-term impacts in your life anyway, but as a group of volunteers, you can group together, you can, lobby for those medical costs in the future that might be associated with that, and you can solve for that as a group of volunteers. You can both get the long-term social benefits to everyone, preventing everyone else from who might have to be exposed, but then you can also whittle down the risk associated with your participation and any medical implications in the long term associated with you. So for me, it still remains a win-win, right? Because I wouldn't, as a regular human who did get long COVID, that those kinds of options wouldn't be available. I'd still have to go in on it alone. So in my mind, it still seems more beneficial, both for the social good and for the individual, to do it through a challenge trial. And not only that, but in the trial scenario, you would have access to doctors and access to medical staff, people that are busy conducting the trial. So it seems like a good deal to me.
Yeah, so I appreciate the point on, sounds like you feel that an organization that can sort of leverage the collective power of volunteers can mitigate some of the outcomes, even if they do take place. Interesting. Other people on this point?
Yeah, I think that the risk of long-term complications is definitely the most significant risk for the type of people who would be partaking in a challenge trial, and any challenge trial beyond the one that's currently going on should really emphasize to people that this is a thing that has been reported and that there's a lack of knowledge about it, so that they can make to the best of their judgment and informed decision as to whether they want to take part. But in response to people who say that we shouldn't do it because of long COVID, I would say that the only way we can sort of come to understand it is by, following people who've been infected with COVID over a long time in the sort of situation that a challenge trial would allow. I mean, if you look at how we came to learn about long COVID, it was, from what I understand, mostly women who were reporting that, I'm having these sort of symptoms much longer than would be sort of suggested from like other reports, and they were initially dismissed by doctors and not taken seriously, and it was only through sort of getting together and sort of demanding that they were taken seriously that it's now so much of a known thing that is coming up in this discussion. And so I think that if we the more challenge trials that take place and the more long-term follow-ups of participants of challenge trials that are conducted, the better we can understand long-term COVID symptoms.
Danica or Gabrielle, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think that was the sort of reason. I am scared about conducting long COVID, but again, if the pandemic ends sooner, I do think it's worth, unless people die, then I do think it is worth contracting long COVID. For me personally, I cannot speak for anyone else.
Sure.
But personally, I'm willing to take that because there are a lot of people struggling right now, and this pandemic needs to be over. So I'm willing to take the hit if necessary. And I don't hope to get long COVID, but if I do, at least then there would be a lot of data that they could collect from me in the process, because they will know exactly how much of the coronavirus I was infected with, and they can monitor the effects. And yes, like Alex said, the more we know about long COVID, the more we can help those with it as well. So just another way to help, I guess, as scary as it might be.
Yeah. Gabrielle, anything to add?
I think the others basically covered it. Just that I would never want to downplay the concern or the effects. Long COVID is certainly scary. Other types of long-term damage are certainly scary, but for our age group and my health level, it's still not a huge risk. I would say that, and exactly as Danica said, I would still consider it worth it. Like I would know those risks. And being in quarantine is terrible all by itself, you know? And I actually have one of the best situations that you can have in the middle of a pandemic. I live in a nice house with people I like, and I have all the stuff that I need, and it's still terrible. It still just doesn't feel good. The scale of suffering that exists here would be enormously outweighs anything that could happen to me in the course of a challenge trial.
Thank you. So my next question is about sort of conversations around challenge trials, if our panelists have talked about it with family and friends, and what the response has been. I do want to emphasize that the people on this panel have not yet been accepted into challenge trials. They, have not begun a process of being in one beyond being registered with One Day Sooner. So if they haven't talked to family or friends yet, it would be pretty reasonable from my perspective, given that it's still fairly hypothetical for them. But I know this is a question that we get a lot from audience members at these kinds of events is, what does your family think of this? So for any panelists who are willing to discuss that, there's the question.
Well, actually, I think my sister and my nephews are in the audience, and this is where they're finding out about it.
Surprise!
and look, I mean, to be completely honest with you, for me personally, this is the type of example I'd like to set for my nephews. Truly, right? For me to be able to do something that could help in such a complex and difficult situation, exactly like you were describing, Gabrielle. There's just so much suffering, and I think that there are times where maybe our perspective on the world can be so individualistic, and there are moments to step back and just ask how we can contribute to the collective. And for me, if I just at a very philosophical level remember that I am part of this collective, it makes me feel good about this.
Thanks.
Similarly, I have family members in the audience. Hi, parents. And our conversation, they were very understanding and they were very supportive. And I think a lot of that was, I was able to basically say, which was absolutely true, I made this decision because of the way that I was raised, the values that I hold. In response to briefly to the audience question, I think Jewish values played a huge part in this decision for me. And as a result, even if my parents were concerned about me, they fully understood the place that it was coming from, and that it was really like, that's the way I was raised, My friends have been incredibly supportive. I really just, I only haven't told my grandmothers because they would worry too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you would like to take this opportunity to talk a bit more about the interplay with your Jewish values, go for it.
Oh, sure. Basically, so this actually ties back to when I first signed up. The first thing that sort of popped into my head at that point was this philosophical tradition, I guess you would say, that to save a single life, it's as if you've saved an entire world. And that was, as I said, very early in the pandemic. At that point, the estimates were that every day sooner that a vaccine is developed saved thousands of lives. It struck me that it would be worth it to participate in a challenge trial if that helped a vaccine happen 1 day sooner, 2 days sooner, let alone a couple of weeks sooner. And having that as part of my sort of psychological makeup, very, very ingrained in me from childhood, I think made it a pretty clear-cut decision. Certainly community values are very strong in Judaism and the way that I was raised in general. And just the inherent and equal dignity of every single life. Those were things that really, really mattered to me when I was making this decision. And yeah, I would say that it also comes up in terms of, you know, letting it be my decision. This to me is also a matter of my human dignity, that I am allowed to make these types of decisions and say, I will put my health at risk for the sake of others. I will do this thing in order to try to enable other lives to be saved. So yeah, there were a lot of ways that Jewish values played a part in this for me.
Thank you. Danica? Family, friend conversation.
Family, friend. So my family aren't the most excited that I want to do this. But they understand why I want to. Because I'm seeing people suffer around me, because my friend couldn't mourn her grandparents' death. And actually, more recently, my grandpa passed away at the end of last year, and he lived in California, so I couldn't go, and I couldn't go to his funeral. I had to watch it with my family through Zoom, and you know, the very platform I'm talking to you on right now, and that in itself is just it's difficult. You know, it's not like once this pandemic is over, we can do it all again. That was it. That was my goodbye. And you know, last year there was when it happened, we kind of said to ourselves, it's okay, year anniversary, we can go, we can pay our respects, we can be there. But nobody is safe until everyone is. And just because the UK is moving forward quite quickly in terms of vaccinating everyone, the rest of the world isn't, which means that it's not yet safe to fly on planes. It's not yet safe to be in different countries. So who knows when I will be able to go see there, hug my grandma, you know, comfort my little cousins. So my family understand that I want to do this, and I want to make the pandemic finish as soon as possible for the people, for myself, for my family, as well as other people whose family members will pass away whilst the pandemic is on, regardless of whether or not it's from the virus. But then they won't be able to come together and support one another and celebrate these people's lives. And I think that's such an important process in general in human life. We celebrate those who go. So my family knows how I feel about this and what it means to me. So as much as they're concerned about how how it might affect me, whether or not I get long COVID, whether or not I do suffer seriously from the virus, they know that I want to do this for a reason, and it's an important reason. So they support me in that sense. Which is good. For the question that was asked on the thingy, so for me, I'd say faith. I find my faith important in my decision, but not necessary. There are a lot of people in One Day Sooner who aren't religious and actually do it as well. And personally, growing up in faith, I was taught from a very young age that we should always try to help one another, help those who are more vulnerable, do what you can. And this is something that I know I can do. I always had the mentality of, if it's not that much of a bother for you, if it's just an inconvenience and it helps people's lives and improves them massively, why wouldn't you do it? There's a chance I'll be asymptomatic. So if I am just sitting in a room, staring at my laptop for a few weeks, then, and that will save lives, and why not do it? It's, so it's that sort of thing. I think faith makes people more think about it more, because if you're told as you're growing up, help those who are vulnerable, even at risk for yourself, then that's the type of thing that you will think about. Even if you didn't think about it naturally in the first place, it'll be there in the back of your mind. So I think that's how my faith has impacted my decision. It's made me think about it more. I wouldn't say it's the teachings itself or the words on the page that tell me I should do this. It's more of the message. It's the help others, do what you can, love one another. And that's what I do. And that's how I use my faith.
Thanks, Danica. Alex, have you had any conversations with friends and family about these challenge trials?
Yeah, I'd say my parents were worryingly supportive of me. I had it planned out in my head, all the arguments I was going to go through them when discussing challenge trials, but I called them and they just said, yeah, that's fine. I thought, don't you want to try and push back a little? Yeah, but I think when I was sort of going through it with them, I did sort of say to them, if you don't want me to do this, I won't do this. And I think if you're considering, volunteering for a child trial and you're worried about how your family or friends might feel about it, it might be worthwhile to give them some measure of control over your actions, because even if you feel that's very important for you specifically to take part in a child trial, One Day Sooner's got, thousands of people who have signed up to express interest, or there'll definitely be other people, and it might be better for, someone whose family is perhaps more blasé about it to take part, as opposed to you if your family would be particularly worried about you.
Yeah, everyone's got a different situation, whether it's whether it's how their family feels about it or how much their family's opinions factor into their own decision making. So thoughts to be had. The next pair of questions touched a little bit on a theme that's already come up a bit, which is where we're at now in the pandemic. So in the past year, we've both learned more about the coronavirus, and we've developed several effective vaccines, which are now starting to get deployed at different speeds to different people in different countries. And so I'm curious to talk about the present moment for our panelists. What use of challenge trials is most compelling to you right now? You can talk about vaccine trials, you can talk about learning more about the virus, you can talk about reinfection or something else. And how has the spread or not spread of vaccines affected where you stand right now on challenge trials?
So, if I may, I think, and I was saying this a little bit earlier, that if you are, as I am, logging on from Europe or from the United States, or any part of the world that has been privileged enough to get a great deal of vaccine supply, it can potentially feel like we are rounding a corner. Um, and and I really want to take a moment to, for people who are of that kind of audience, who maybe are having that kind of feeling, to also remind those same people that there are a group of people in South Africa, for example, my country of origin, who are seeing news reports, that there are other countries where up to 30%, or Israel, like a really high percentage of the population have gotten access, right? And yet in South Africa, the percentage of people who have access to the vaccine now sits at 0.3%. And, it's one thing to go through this process and see the developments, see vaccine distributions happening, and see these huge vaccine campaigns happening in certain countries. And it's another thing to see it and not have access to it. And that's really tough, right? Especially if you've got the new South African variant that ravaged you at the exact same time. And so, if anything, it's felt more important to get the vaccine supply to where it needs to be, because like Danica, like you were saying, we're not done until everyone has been taken care of. And we really, I think, it's so easy to get to this place of complacency because my country or my community have had access. But the reality is, this is not going to be done until the last person has had a jab in their arm. And even then we have variants, but that's really the way that it should be thought of. And this is why I think that philosophy, and whether it's religious, whether it's spiritual, that not forgetting that we are all connected, whether we like it or not. This is a collective challenge. And even though we might be able to protect the individual with everything that we've learned in certain cases, we're never going to be done with this until the collective is protected as well. My 2 cents as a South African.
Thanks, Zane. Gabrielle?
That was a fantastic answer. Not quite sure how to follow up because I fully agree with everything Zane said. Although of course it is a little less personal since I live in the United States. I think that Europe and North America have really, I hear people talking in my area about how this is almost over, and it is almost over for us. I think that motivation of the two of the motivations that you listed, the two that are most important to me would be making sure that there's enough vaccines for everybody in the world. Basically everything Zane just said. I don't need to rehash. And the other one would be seeing how reinfection works. I think we're not really sure about immunity yet, and how long lasting it is. And that's going to be extremely important for understanding if this is something we're going to have to face in, a couple months down the line, couple years down the line again. The meta level to me of why challenge trials are important is almost not just this challenge trial, it's pandemic preparedness overall. where we know we are going to face more pandemics in the future. This was extremely predictable. And the fact of the matter is that we did not have good decision-making mechanisms in place to figure out if or when we should run challenge trials, if or when we should implement lockdowns, how large those lockdowns should be. All of the decision-making processes were really injured in this pandemic. So there's a level to this challenge trial to me that almost gets over the hurdle of like, we're going to use this to, besides all the good it can do for this specific pandemic, we can also recognize moving forward that this is an option that we should maybe feel comfortable with implementing more widely, because we know we're going to see this again.
Danica?
So yeah, this has actually been something that I've had to think about quite seriously over the last few weeks, because I did receive a text from my local GP that said if I wanted to book my vaccine, I could. And that was a sort of crossroads point where it's sort of, I can do that, I can get it, or I can continue on and try to help develop other vaccines. And I thought about it, and although it'll be quite, there are a lot more risks, I don't even have to be infected with the virus to get one of these vaccines.
Yeah.
I thought about the amount of information we could gain from me testing out a new vaccine, and how having more vaccines will help with equitable distribution. We need, for other, so for example, with the Pfizer vaccine, it needs to be stored in freezing temperatures. It's just not, it's going to be so difficult for poorer countries to be able to distribute that amongst its people. So we need more vaccines. The more vaccines there are, the quicker they can be produced, the more that they can go out to everyone. Particularly, I can't choose which vaccine trials will go next, but I'd hope for one which helps with, which is just a singular dose. That would be really useful, because I know there are a lot of people, for example, where I was born in the Philippines, who would have to cross mountains and rivers to get to a place once, let alone again in 3 weeks or so. So there are things like that which it needs to be done for everyone to be safe and everyone to have been vaccinated. I do believe we need more vaccines to let it happen as soon as possible. So I called the GP, and I told them that I wanted to participate in the challenge trials, and they're actually very supportive about it, which I was grateful for. I was scared that they go, okay, well, you're not allowed our vaccines at all, but they said, sure, just let us know if you find out you're not eligible, or if you change your mind or anything like that, then let us know, and we can book you an appointment as soon as possible. Which is a huge sigh of relief. But theoretically, I could be in a trial soon, because I'm in the UK and because we're actually doing it here. It's more at the door for me. I can actually participate in these challenge trials. So even though holding out for a few more months may mean the rest of my family can safely meet and they can, have a meal together and I can't, it's keeping my eye on what's important, and it's the people whose lives will be saved by having this information. So yeah, the fact that the vaccines are going around has made it a bit more difficult, but it's also strengthened my do this, we got to do this, it's important.
And I do want to make clear that we at One Day Sooner are not discouraging anyone from getting vaccinated. So this first came up when we had volunteers who were eligible to be in phase 3 trials. And some of our volunteers have gone ahead and done that. And, you know, we are very much on the personal autonomy angle at that level. You know, if you are excited to be in a phase 3 trial, go be in a phase 3 trial. That's useful. You know, right now, if you have the opportunity to get vaccinated and you would rather get vaccinated right now, go and get vaccinated. Like, there's a huge public health benefit to just having more people who are vaccinated. So I don't want anyone to think that One Day Sooner is here to sort of hug all our volunteers tight to our chest and say, no, you can't have them. They're for a potential
sorry, I'm
challenge
just
trial.
overly eager. This does not reflect
the
comments I say, does not reflect the perspectives of One Day Sooner as a whole.
Yep. Alex, thoughts on sort of most valuable, uses of challenge trials, given where we are right now?
I mean, I was in a similar situation to Danica, where I got the message from the GP, but unlike Danica, you know, even before the message had fully loaded, I'd immediately signed up to get the vaccine. So I can understand if you're watching this and thinking that, you know, oh, I've been sitting here lying to you. But I would say that my perspective on challenge trials has, as I become more involved with, you know, doing some sort of volunteering of One Day Sooner, is seeing it in terms of a long-term system. Whereas, like, yes, we have vaccines now, and yes, it looks like in the UK at least, like, we're almost at the end of the road. You don't know when, for example, a new vaccine resistant variant will pop up in another country and then come back, and then we have to start all over again. I think, you know, it would be nice to believe that, you know, we're more knowledgeable now about you know, the coronavirus, and we'll take more precautions. But I think due to the exponential nature of the COVID virus, that it only really takes, like, you know, a small gap or a small failing for the cases to balloon and to have to go back into lockdown again. And so from my perspective, as someone who will hopefully be getting vaccinated tomorrow, is that there may perhaps in the future be a situation in which more challenge trials will need to be conducted. And I would want, as part of my perspective as someone who volunteers for One Day Sooner, is that, you know, they're just more readily accepted and run through, as opposed to, you know, having to go through the entire debate again of whether it's ethical to ask people to be infected.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, to answer a slightly different question, if you are someone who's listening to this and is like, I support challenge trials, but I never would have participated in one, or maybe I would have used to, but not at this point for one reason or another, you can still sign up on our website as a supporter, interested person, get our newsletter, follow our journey. You know, our information in our community is not exclusive to people who are, you know, pledged to a challenge trial or at any level. All right, my next question, we're getting close to the end of my list. So, you know, if people in the audience have questions that they've been holding back or have just come up, please do put them in the chat. I see that there was a follow-up on the religion question. Was religion part of how One Day Sooner started? No, we are not a religious organization. It was not sort of part of our founding mission. It's something that really varies from volunteer to volunteer, but it's not, you know, at the core of One Day Sooner's values. As a full institution. But my next question is about the response to the UK trials. So was announced in the fall that the UK government would fund challenge trials if they received ethical approval. And then it was announced mid-February that the Research Ethics Committee had given approval for a characterization study to move forward in London. And so I'm just curious to hear what it was like for all of you to learn that there would actually be a challenge trial for COVID-19. and how that, if you have additional things to say, like what does that mean for One Day Sooner? What does that mean for the world? Would you rather reserve judgment until the trial is over? What's your thoughts there? Zane?
So I think it's exciting. It's exciting to see that it can happen. I mean, I think all the building blocks to make a challenge trial are complex and take a great deal of planning. And so to actually see one, go through that end-to-end process, I think it also offers us as volunteers, us as an organization as well, to utilize this moment to provide a great deal of public education. And I mean, this is exactly what we're doing, right? Is to communicate more about what challenge trials are and why they may be useful and how they could be useful to speed up the end of this pandemic. So for me, I think we've just started, and I think I'm excited by it. And I think right now, the thing that I find most exciting is the opportunity for public education to expand on it.
Thank you. Gabrielle?
Yeah, I was thrilled to hear about the challenge trial in the UK because it felt like I don't want to say vindication, but it felt like that other people had recognized the importance of One Day Sooner's mission and the importance of challenge trials. So it was really exciting to know that bringing that issue to the forefront had succeeded in some way, and that we would be able to use this trial to learn more about COVID-19. With One Day Sooner moving forward, I'm also really excited about opportunities for public education and basically doing outreach about the usefulness of vaccines and general pandemic preparedness type things. As I mentioned, I'm very enthusiastic about this idea of sort of getting our institutions to a better decision-making process that will make discussions like this more streamlined and get to a decision quicker in future crises. Can I sort of like tie this together with my answer to deal breakers? Okay.
Yeah.
So
I only just noted the deal breakers question. I didn't see it until now. So yeah, we'll feel free to tie it
in. So one of the attendants just asked about what would be a deal breaker for me participating in a challenge trial. For this particular pandemic, I'm going to get the vaccine as soon as I'm eligible, which still won't be for a little while. But I haven't seen my grandmothers in a year, and I really want to. And I know they really want to see me, and I miss my family. So sort of the deal breaker for this pandemic is just like, when is the vaccine? When am I going to be able to get it? But for other types of pandemics, I think it would be on an extremely case-by-case basis, and we need a better decision-making process to know whether challenge trials should go ahead at all. I'm a very big proponent of volunteers' autonomy. I think that if there are people willing to participate in a challenge trial and clamoring for that challenge trial, we should give that extra weight. And for me, a deal breaker would be something like, I don't see a reason to do the challenge trial. I don't think it'll give us any more information. It's a disease that's extremely not dangerous at all. For example, like this just doesn't seem important enough to spend the effort on, or a disease that is so dangerous that I have an extremely high probability of dying during a challenge trial. But I think that there are still people who would participate in challenge trials in either situation, and that might not be a deal breaker for them, and we should give their voices a lot of weight. I'm enthusiastic about One Day Sooner being able to amplify that avenue of discussion in the future.
Cool. Danica, reaction to trial approval?
I was excited. Sorry, I'm now looking like a crazily enthusiastic weirdo, which is a bit true, but
Infection booster.
yeah, well, as someone from the UK and, as a deputy UK chapter manager, we had worked so hard to try to do this. And it was one of those things of when we were waiting for the HRA approval, we were so worried. And as time went by, we were scared that it wasn't going to get approved and worried that if the UK didn't approve it, then probably nowhere else would, because nowhere else was looking at potentially doing these trials. So for us to finally get that, yes, they're going to move ahead, it was really exciting to know that, yeah, as Gabrielle said, our work wasn't for nothing. We were working to do something important, and it was recognized. And it's exciting to see that something you've been a part of can potentially help others. And so that was quite the exciting bit to move to that when I find out that we were going forward. And because it also sets a precedent for future pandemics. If we've approved these human challenge trials without a rescue remedy or without at the moment, and the fact that it's deadly, it means that if there is another future pandemic, they can look at this and go, well, the UK did it and it was okay, so we should do this now. It can help us develop a vaccine quicker and things like that. And it's changed the course of this pandemic, and I think that was really exciting for me.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so I think like most people, I was very happy and excited to see that the challenge trial would be starting in the UK. And then I read into it, and what became, to lead this into the deal breaker thing, what became a deal breaker for me was the fact that it was limited to London, and you'd have to travel down to London, including for pre-screening. And I had like this image in my head of me traveling down by train to London to get pre-screened for the challenge trial, and then getting COVID, on the train, and that just being incredibly frustrating. And so my hope in the future is that, following this challenge trial, there will be more challenge trials by different groups and different companies across, just a wider spatial area that can make it easier for people to partake and, help to get a, more representative sample. I think another deal breaker for me would be if the data, and I'm not absolutely not implying this is going to occur with the HVivo, this is just a general thing, but if the data that was taken from the challenge trial it seemed like it was going to be either not widely shared or misused in some way. Obviously, I think everybody has sort of talked about how important it is to help develop knowledge. And so if the data that, was gathered through a challenge trial, if it seemed that was going to be squandered in some way, that would be a deal breaker for me.
Thank you. Zane or Danica, do you have anything to add to the deal breakers question? So what would make you decide not to do a challenge trial for COVID-19?
I think if it seemed like the trial's motive was more about financial gain as opposed to helping with vaccine equity or fighting future variants, then that would be a deal breaker for me. I don't want to participate in the trials because of the money or because of anything like that. Even when I first signed up, didn't even know there was going to be a compensation for it. But I think, there's a lot of reputation about the pharmaceutical industry and how they can focus a lot on money and look at people as lab rats. And I think that's partly why I'm really big fan of One Day Sooner, because I feel like this organization will take care of me as I do participate in trials.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear how you would sort of gauge a company's intentions going into a trial. Would it be like looking for their plans on how they plan to deploy the vaccine. Because sometimes it can be really hard to tell going, what's going to happen after a trial takes place.
Okay, for example, with this characterization study, I think it's so admirable, the people who are currently undergoing and things like that, because they're just being given the virus itself live, and they can gain so much information. And that is the first step to developing vaccines and working out the reinfection studies, and it's making it safer for future studies. But admittedly, when I first looked at the idea of a characterization study, I was a bit nervous that the information could have been ignored. For example, if they found out that instead of 2 meters, you actually need to stand 5 meters, the government could see that and go, okay, well, that won't work for businesses, so let's just, we'll stick to the 2 meters, we'll disregard that knowledge. And that concern is something that was going through my head, of a sort of, are they going to be dismissing the information we give because it's not profitable for people, or is this information actually going to be beneficial and going to be used to help? Obviously, I'm in support of the characterization studies. It is essential.
Yeah, but that was a concern you had.
Yeah.
Thanks. Zane, deal breakers?
Nothing really to add. I think everyone's covered it, which is, I think the main thing is what Alex was saying about the data, but I completely agree, right? I think it's so difficult to ascertain sometimes at those beginning stages what is the real intent behind it. And I think we're all on the same page, which is that we want this vaccine distribution to be more equitable. We want more people to have access. And again, and I echo what we were saying earlier, is that doing it as a collective, as a group of volunteers, I think that gives us a little bit more weight in dictating a few of those conditions up front.
Thank you. All right, I have like 2 questions left, and we have like 6 minutes, and they were both kind of what do you want people to know type questions, so you can answer either one or both. One was, what do you want the audience to know about volunteering for a trial? Anything you haven't said yet, maybe a misperception you want to correct. Then the other one is, what is it like being involved with One Day Sooner? Especially for those of you, Danica, you're UK Deputy Chapter Manager. Gabrielle has been on our communications team for a while as a volunteer ambassador. Anything you'd like to let people know about the One Day Sooner experience?
Sure. I think One Day Sooner is awesome. Good job, everybody.
Gabrielle has been paid to do some research for us, so I guess we should state that as a conflict of interest here. And
yes, conflict of interest.
Will continue to be financially compensated for the future, but she has not been compensated for her work as a member of the communications team as a volunteer ambassador.
Correct. When I say One Day Sooner is awesome, just to clarify, and this is all 100% honest, I did not expect to be compensated for anything I was doing for One Day Sooner. I think that this organization has been incredibly transparent, has really, like, that is one of the primary values that we've discussed in talking points meetings and things like that. So One Day Sooner really practices what it preaches, so to speak. Has been incredibly sensitive to having good communications with volunteers, has done a lot of little social things even to make volunteers feel like part of a community. It's easier to live in this pandemic, and also to have signed up for something that can be a little bit like scary to think about, when you know that you're doing it with a purpose, with a group of other people who share that purpose. I've really valued that aspect of One Day Sooner, where I could have signed up with some faceless organization and never heard from them again. and I still would have participated in a challenge trial had I had the opportunity. But One Day Sooner has made it a lot easier to feel like this is something that I am supported in and that other people are sort of like with me on this. So that has really been a huge, like a really big change for my mindset throughout the pandemic has been the amount of contact that I've had with various volunteers at One Day Sooner. It's just made it a lot easier to bear in a lot of ways.
Glad to hear it. Other comments there? I'm not going to call on people because it'll make it sound like I'm like fishing for compliments, which was not the goal of this question.
I will answer both questions at once. Magic. And so I think what I want audience to know about volunteering for a trial is that One Day Sooner is here and is available. Our aim is to advocate for clinical trial volunteers, and it's that sort of thing of, you know, I would be a lot more scared about long COVID if I didn't have One Day Sooner there backing me. And I know that, for example, if I do suffer from long COVID for quite a while and the clinical companies aren't getting back to me, I know that One Day Sooner will help me ring them up and go, oi, how do we help?
We'll tag team the phones.
Yeah, so I think that's why, partly as well, why I enjoy working with One Day Sooner. It's a lovely community, people with like-minded thoughts, as well as the fact that I can tell they will work to help, like they care about the people and care about the volunteers. So yeah, that's what I'd want you to know is we're here.
Right. If you're watching this and you're about to be in a challenge trial, please get in touch with us. Anyone else?
I'll also say that I think a lot of people have gone through this process during this pandemic of trying to figure out how to be useful. And I think that it's a really important point, right? Because when you have so few options to find a way to be useful in such a huge global pandemic, but you want to be of service in some way, it can sometimes feel a little bit demotivating. And to find an organization of people, and it really, and this I have to say is kind of extraordinary, that really is about this collective group of volunteers first, which I have a great deal of respect for. It does this thing of both being able to add the collective bargaining power of volunteers so that people feel safer, whilst trying to do something that has a great deal of social good. So in terms of an organization that is pursuing a goal that is incredibly admirable, I really do appreciate the organization and of course the community that comes along with it, right? Because I do think, number one, if you haven't signed up, sign up. Number two, being a part of a community of people who think in that like-minded way, it provides a great deal of purpose, and that's a special thing during a pandemic.
Alex, any comments before I wrap things up? I know we're running out of
Yeah,
time.
I guess like the one thing sort of that I think volunteers should know beforehand is to look at whichever group is conducting the challenge trial and try to find out if they've put their protocol for the trial or statements about how the trial will be conducted out beforehand. It's, you know, as Zane mentioned, it's very easy to want to take part in something like this to make it feel like you are doing something. But, you know, and even if it is still admirable to take, you know, to volunteer and take part in such a challenge trial, but it's important to make sure that if you take part, you're not taking part for nothing, and that the data will be released and put to good use.
Yep. think about how, what your values are, your intention is, and whether the trial meets your standards. All right, we are -2 minutes time left, so thank you to our audience for sticking around. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to our panelists for chatting with me today. Again, we are volunteers / I am an employee with One Day Sooner. You can find us at onedaysooner.org. There you can see links to all of our social media, and you can also sign up for our supporters newsletter, as well as register if you yourself are interested in being in a challenge trial, or if you've already been in a vaccine trial. We are also very interested in hearing from you and have a separate sign-up page for that. But with that, I will let you all go and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the Imagine Festival.